Hi, I'm Nan Geschke, your host of the Los Altos History Show, and we're standing in front of the San Antonio Club, located at 647 San Antonio Road, and I'm here with Don McDonald, a fellow historical commissioner. Don has done some research on the effect of World War II in Los Altos. He's investigated some newspapers like the Los Altos Times and the Palo Alto Times, as well as looking at the commentaries from the oral histories that have been done in town. And first of all, Don, what was this San Antonio Club originally used for?
Well, originally it was a society, a literary music society across the street in the Carruthers home. And then in about 1908, they built this and ultimately changed the name to the San Antonio Club, and it became more of a ladies' organization.
A women's group.
That's right.
But how was it used during the war?
Well, during the war, it was sort of at that time there were very few places where people could gather in Los Altos. This was a gathering place for the hostesses that went out to dance with the troops who were at Page Mill Road and the ones that were over in Moffett Field. So it was
kind of a social club then.
It was kind of a social club, that's right. And it was used for dances. The men would come here and they would have dances here too.
Oh,
so it was
a place where the people of the town could entertain the servicemen who were around here at that time. Yeah. Now, what was the effect of the war on Los Altos, Don? I mean, we were certainly on the Western Front, but how was the town affected?
Well, in some ways, it was affected like every place else in America. We had tremendous shortages, and of course, the rationing that went with it. We also had a lot of drives, bond drives, drives for newspaper drives,
metal
drives. That's right, all kinds of drives. And then the disruptions of family life, of course, was common throughout the country. How the West Coast cities differed was that they feared Japanese air raids, and for that reason, Los Altos, like any other community, had its civil defense volunteers. There were blackouts, and they had to have airway wardens monitor those. There were airplane spotters, and that's there was also set up emergency hospitals. Sammy Kahn, who was a local pharmacist, and his wife actually set up a 20-bed hospital in part of the Episcopal Church in Los Altos, and they got retired physicians and nurses, and the Boy Scouts got a lot of people involved and actually had drills in case there had been an air raid.
So there was a lot of preparedness going on here.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Now, Don, I know that we mentioned the Japanese and the fear of the Japanese here. The internment of the Japanese families was prevalent in, it was across the country, but affected a lot of families here in the county, didn't it?
Yes, there were 4,500 in the county of Santa Clara, and a lot of them were in Los Altos, in the nursery business, and there were, over here in North Los Altos, some truck gardens, and they were all sent away to these relocation camps. And some of them, like the Fioruccis, their neighbors protected their interests, and they came back and had a very successful life after that. In other cases, it didn't turn out so well.
Yeah, there were people who took advantage and took the land. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, were there any close by military installations around Los Altos?
Yes, there were two. There was an Army installation over in Page Mill Road, in Palo Alto, actually on Stanford property there. And there were a lot of Army troops passed through there. And there was an installation, of course, still is, at Moffett Field.
Sure.
The Navy. And between those two, Los Altos had a number of servicemen visit, and this is one of the places that they actually came and were entertained. They had dances here, and they would, when the hostesses would go out, junior hostesses, to the USOs at Page Mill or at Moffett Field. The buses would come here and collect them, so it was a sort of a meeting place.
I understand too that that people entertain the servicemen in their homes as well.
Well, there was a lot of that.
A lot of that.
And
yes.
some of the homes actually were made into apartments for servicemen.
So there was kind of a war consciousness, probably pervasive across the country.
No question of that.
Yeah. Now, Don, were there any industries that were involved in the war that were local here?
Yes, the Hendy Iron Works over in Sunnyvale was one of the big defense plants in the area, and it took a lot of men from Los Altos over there who worked during the war, women too. And then the Permanente plants.
Yes.
Metals Corporation. They also took a lot of people in both defense related projects. Within the little town of Los Altos at the time, there were two minor establishments. There was the Formway over on
that industry.
That way, and then the Bleibler Iron Works.
Which still exists today.
It still exists today. They had little contracts, and the Ramsey Garage actually did work for the Jeeps out of Moffett Field. So,
is that right? So indirectly we were involved in the war effort.
Oh, yes, I should say.
Now, how many casualties were there from actually the town of Los Altos? Do you have any idea?
Well, we're trying to get the exact figures. We do know that at the second year of the war, in December of '43, there had been 181 Los Altos, men and women, in the Army, Navy, WACS, Waves, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, and Merchant Marine.
Sure.
And at that time, there had been 3 deaths. We also know that at the end of the war, there were 28 deaths.
28 deaths.
And I assume that by that time, there were probably 500 or 600 people from here in the services or in the war effort.
Now, I know that we're going to go on to Shaw Park from here, and we're going to see the memorial that's been erected now for all veterans, but it was actually through the work of 2 men who were World War II vets who really got this whole memorial idea in place. That's a fine tribute then to the servicemen who lost their lives both in that war and other wars.
It certainly is.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to the park.
Let's go.
Don and I are in Shell Park now in front of the Cradle of Liberty Memorial that's just been put in place about 1.5 years ago. And one of the questions I forgot to ask you, Don, when we were over in front of the San Antonio Club was, what was Los Altos in those days? Was it, and there were no real towns, and what was the population, for example?
Well, it was all Los Altos, and Los Altos Hills was all one entity as far as the newspapers went. And we think, I've been told the population was between 3,000 and 4,000, but I don't know that for sure. We can and will get better figures on that, but at the moment, that's my working hypothesis.
Right. So again, this memorial that's behind us, and we're going to get a couple of good shots of it for you to see the whole of it, was the work of two men, Jay Brandon and Bill Henderson, who spearheaded a drive actually to raise the funds, for this memorial. We're going to be going back to the studio and talking with them about their project and about their involvement in the war, and what it took, to get this statue in place. So we'll see you back in the studio. And thanks, Don, for joining us today. Really appreciated you coming out.
My pleasure, Nan.
Okay, thanks. With us now in the studio are Bill Henderson and Jay Brandon. Welcome. Jay is a World War II and Korean War veteran. He served in the U.S. Army and Air Force. Jay served in both the United States and Great Britain during World War II. He was among the early pioneers of the Air Force space program. Jay is a retired aerospace manager from Lockheed Martin and has lived in Los Altos for more than 40 years. Bill enlisted in the Navy in 1940 and was at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. During the attack, his ship, the light cruiser, the USS Helena, was struck by a Japanese torpedo. After repairs, the Helena participated in the invasion of the Guadalcanal and many other engagements against the Japanese before being sunk at Kula Gulf in the northern Solomon Islands. Bill is a retired division manager from Pacific Bell and has lived in Los Altos for more than 40 years. Again, welcome to the show. We're really happy to have you here tonight, both of you.
Glad to be here.
Bill, now tell me, what was the impetus for this cause of getting a memorial, to veterans in Los Altos?
My wife and I were traveling in the southeast United States by car. And you go through all these small towns down there, and we noticed that there were a lot of memorials to veterans from the Civil War and the World War II and Korea War. And I got thinking, why don't we have one in Los Altos?
Sure.
So when I got back home, I contacted Jay and talked about it with Jay. And we both agreed it would be a well worthwhile project to have a memorial that recognized the veterans in Los Altos and Los Altos Hills. And from that beginning, we laid a plan as to what we would do, and we contacted a lot of very well-known people to be on our honorary committee. We started out, George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, was on our committee. Admiral Stockdale, the Medal of Honor man, senior prisoner of war in Vietnam, was on our committee.
Also ran for the vice presidency.
That's right. And then Dusty Rhodes, who's a local man, was a young Navy fighter pilot and was shot down by the Japanese and served 3 years in a prisoner of war camp and came back and became the leader of the U.S. Navy Blue Angels. And then we had a lot of local dignitaries on our list. And the idea of the honorary committee list on our stationery leads credibility to the organization, and it certainly helped in our fundraising efforts, because when people see on our honorary committee citizens of that stature, they say, if they don't say it, they think it, something that's being supported by these people must be very worthwhile. So that's how it started. Then we had to go to the city council.
So you actually started an association, true?
We started the association. We applied for and received the 501c3, which is a non-taxable charitable organization.
Right.
And then we had to go to the city council and get their approval, because the memorial would eventually be on city property.
And how did council take to this idea of yours and Jay's?
Well, it was interesting, Jan and Nan, that the at that time we didn't have an idea of what the memorial would look like. We had a concept of what we wanted, and Jay was our spokesman before the council and outlined what that concept was, and the city council agreed with that and said that they unanimously supported it. And so that then got us started into all the other ramifications of building a memorial, the fundraising and getting the sculptures and the advertising and all that. But that was the very beginning of it.
Great. So Jay, what was this idea of yours for the memorial that you shared with City Council that they were so enthusiastic about?
Well, we knew from the beginning that this project was going to evolve. Bill and I, although we had many years of experience in business, we'd never run a project of this kind before. So we set out to create a memorial that would just honor the veterans from Los Altos and Los Altos Hills. But as time went by, we realized that we actually should honor veterans from the Revolutionary War onward.
Sure.
And this should be for people of all races, all creeds, and all genders, and that we should honor them for their sacrifices, and that we should not in any way glorify war. So then we said we must have a concept which speaks to the matter of honor, devotion to duty, service to your country, and for those people who gave everything and gave their lives even for their country. So then with that notion in mind, we said our memorial should not have guns, cannon, swords, any of the paraphernalia of war on the monument. Rather, it should be something which honors people who sacrificed to bring about the peace. And ultimately, we said we want a memorial that's quiet and where people can go and sit and contemplate what happened to their comrades or what the world should come to. Just a place where people can be at ease and be at one with the idea of service.
So Jay, did you have an idea of where that might be in Los Altos?
At the beginning, we did not have an idea of where it should be. What we had was an idea of a place that is safe, a place that is quiet, away from traffic. It should be beautiful, and it should be a place that people would just naturally gravitate to. So that was the sort of the set of criteria that we established. We also did not want to rely solely on our own judgment. So we formed a committee, a site selection committee that looked at 14 different locations in the city of Los Altos, and we kept coming back to Shoup Park. Mm-hmm. And as we looked at the park, on one occasion we asked Mayor Francis LaPole to look at it with us. We found a site off in a corner of the park that was not being used, but it was in a grove of redwoods. And right away we can see, there's something about redwood trees that is just, they're like a cathedral. So we said this is a place of serenity, a place that we can put our monument. Right. So the problem then became, how do we get the approval of the city for that location? Right.
And I know that you had a process too for finding an artist or a sculptor for this. And just briefly, what was the process, Bill?
To start out with, we had no idea how to do this, and we contacted the arts director in Palo Alto, because I have a lot of memorials in Palo Alto and statues, and met with him, and he was very helpful. He gave us the mailing list of 400 artists across the country, and we sent to those 400 a outline of what we wanted the statue to represent, and asked them if they wanted to compete. And of those 400, 40 wanted to compete, and they sent us pictures of their previous work and a resume of their education and accomplishments. And from that 40, we had a committee that selected of the 40, they selected 3 that they thought we should look at. And all Jay and I had was all we had was a last name. We didn't know where the artist was from or what sex they were. We didn't want to know. We wanted this to be a very objective judgment of who the artist would be. It turned out, we asked each of those 3 to build us a model, an 18-inch model, and we paid them $1,500 each for that. And the winner turned out to be Rebecca J. Truman from Los Altos.
Isn't that amazing?
That was
I think
wonderful.
we should point out that people applied all the way from Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, I
Oh, yes,
suppose,
yes, yes.
to San Diego.
Isn't that it's amazing? Yeah.
And the other amazing thing is that the three finalists, all of them were from California. One was from Sacramento, and one was from San Francisco, and of course R.J. here from
Says a
Los
lot
Altos.
about the art in this state.
It does, but-
Well, I know that there was a big fundraising effort, and that there were some people I know you wanted to mention, Jay, Bob Grimm and Bob Simon, and Paul Nyberg, I know, helped you, with your fundraising efforts. How much money did you have to raise?
Well, it was very interesting. Since we had never done a project of this kind before, Bill and I decided, well, we should raise at least $25,000. Then Bill said, but you can't buy a good automobile for that. And we realized that we could not just make up our minds without help. So we decided to go to some real experts, as you say.
Yeah.
Bob Simon, who was a fundraiser for Stanford, Bob Grimm, who was very strong in the History House, and Paul Nyberg from the Town Crier. He's the publisher and owner of the Town Crier. And they advised us to raise at least $100,000. And if you know Paul Nyberg, you know what a great guy he is and what an optimist he is. And he said, well, you won't have any difficulty raising $100,000. And we took him at his word. We applied to the Packard Foundation for a grant, and they gave us, I think, $25,000, wasn't it, Bill? And we went to other individuals, and ultimately we appealed to the citizens of Los Altos and Los Altos Hills. Over 500 families responded, and in the long run we raised, Bill, was it over $125,000?
Oh, that's marvelous. That's really so. Jay, when was this unveiled? Actually, when did the process start, Bill? When you and Jay first got together?
It was in the fall of 1996.
Okay, fall of '96. And so, when was the statue actually unveiled?
Well, it wouldn't be fair to just tell you a date.
Yeah.
I must say that we had enormous help from the Los Altos school system, from the Town Crier, and from many military organizations, and a lot of volunteers from Los Altos. So we put on this program. We had a very grand ceremony on the 4th of July, 1998. And Bill and I were worried about whether anyone would show up. It turned out that our estimate was that about 2,000 people did indeed show up, a very enthusiastic group of people who seemed to enjoy every minute of the ceremony.
And that was a pretty impressive ceremony, wasn't it, Bill?
It was. I wanted to tag on to something Jay just mentioned. He mentioned Paul Nyberg and Bob Simon and Bob Grimm. Another person who was absolutely essential. If he hadn't helped us, we wouldn't be here tonight. That's Brian McCarthy, who works for the city and the Parks and Recreation Committee. He was a true asset in helping get this done. The ceremony itself took quite a lot of planning. We wanted it to be spectacular, we wanted it to be memorial, we wanted it to be patriotic, and we wanted it to appeal to everybody. We contacted the California National Guard, and they furnished a 36-piece Air Force band. Contacted the Navy, and they furnished a color guard. We contacted the Marine Corps down at the Presidio, the language school at the Presidio in Monterey, and they furnished the Marine Corps drill team. And it took us...
With a spectacular leader.
Right.
And we had arranged with Bill Perry probably 18 months in advance because we knew he would have a busy schedule. And he told us that if he were available, he would participate. And right up until the last minute, we weren't really not sure whether he was going to be there. That morning of July the 4th of 1998, he got off a plane from Hawaii at 6 o'clock in the morning and was at our dedication ceremony that very same morning.
Isn't that marvelous? I think we have a short clip from former Secretary
Bill,
of Defense.
it wouldn't be fair not to mention the two Army buglers.
Oh, yes.
Don't forget them. Yeah.
No.
But I think we have that short clip now of
Okay.
the former Secretary of Defense, William Perry's talk on that day that the memorial was unveiled. So let's roll that clip now.
please join me in welcoming the Honorable former Secretary of Defense, Dr. William J. Perry.
We are approaching the end of the century, and what a century it has been. A century of triumphs and a century of tragedies. The tragedies included 2 world wars and a Cold War. The world wars resulted in the deaths of tens of millions, civilians and soldiers alike. We owe our freedom today to the veterans of those wars, both living and dead. At this time, I would like to ask the veterans of the World Wars, the Korean Wars, Vietnam War, and Desert Storm to stand for recognition by this audience. Please stand.
Jay and Bill, that was quite an impressive ceremony, I know, with the former Secretary of Defense Perry. And it also must have been a wonderful moment when you unveiled the statue.
It was, Nan. In fact, of course, the statue was veiled, as you mentioned, and we had a group of distinguished veterans that were on the honorary unveiling committee. And so we all went over to the statue to unveil it, and they pulled the zipper, and the canvas fell off, and it was absolute silence. There was a mob of people around the statue, and it was absolute silence. And through my mind, in that 2 or 3 seconds, I thought, my gosh, what do they think? And all of a sudden, they burst out in applause. Some people had tears in their eyes, and it was very, very satisfactory.
That must have been an amazing moment.
Yes,
well, I
was.
want to thank both of you, both Jay and Bill, for sharing your vision of this memorial for the town of Los Altos with us tonight. And it's a very impressive memorial, and you should be very proud of it. And I know that you work very hard, and your efforts have really come to fruition. And I really urge all of the viewers who haven't been to Shell Park to see this memorial to please go, because it's really well worth your time and your effort. We also want to thank Don McDonald, who was with us at the beginning part of the show in the interview at the San Antonio Club and also in Shell Park. And we want to thank you, our viewers, for watching the Los Altos History Show, and I hope you join us the next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Jay and
Thank
Dick.
you.
Thank you.